Okay, Nikolai,
Okay.
welcome back. It's nice to see you.
Anthony, thank you again for this opportunity. Always very glad and happy to see you.
Likewise, it's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to discussing primarily Principle 5 today. But I was thinking first, if possible, can you do like a maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4-minute recap of the circumstances that led to Vygotsky sort of developing his theoretical principles and the methodology that he eventually had to create in order to pursue those principles, essentially like Wundt's problem. Can you just maybe quickly recap that before we jump into Principle 5? Cool.
Yeah, well, just a kind of recap, just to refresh my own memory. So, the biggest problem in psychology, and probably the only problem in psychology, which generates all other problems, is very simple. All psychological phenomena, psychological processes, psychological states are by definition subjective phenomena. Thinking, memory, emotions, feeling, representations, sensations, they are very subjective by their ontological status. Okay, they are not objective in the sense that they are outside of our mind, like trees, grass, stones, and so on. So, and but the science, natural science, is something about the objective existing objects, objectively existing objects, something which exists independently of us, like sun, earth, rivers, or even elementary particles in physics, quantum mechanics. Their processes are objectively existing. The physical laws are laws which exist objectively. So they are different from the laws we people create. For example, jurisdictions, the law in the sense of which regulate our relationship. These laws were created by people, but objectively existing laws are not created by people. There is a debate about who created them, but I don't want to do this. But psychological phenomena are completely subjective, which makes a big question. Is it possible to do psychology as a science? How is it possible to find something objective in subjective phenomena? Right? So, and it was a problem just stated by Immanuel Kant, famous German philosopher. He just said directly, psychology as a science is impossible because it should study the processes of human consciousness using human consciousness as a tool to analyze the human consciousness. So we are trying to understand something unknown using the same unknown to understand something unknown, which logically is absolutely impossible, and it is impossible. Yeah. So, and when we speak about crisis in psychology, the crisis which was actively discussed in the beginning of last century. So that was a lot of discussion about the crisis in psychology. And crisis was because psychology could not identify itself as a scientific discipline because of this problem. And the contribution of Wilhelm Wundt was that Wundt made a first step forward to establish experimental psychology, and he even established the experimental laboratory and then famous institute. And he started from so-called elementary psychological processes like sensation, perception, representations, visual perceptions, audio perceptions. So trying to find the minimal brick from which all the human mind is constructed. And that was his contribution. And experimental psychology, like measuring the time of reaction, for example, simple things like that started. But it was at least something which could be measurable. And a famous psychophysiological law was discovered. The law of the proportion between stimulus and response was discovered, and many, many things. But the problem remained. The problem remained because higher psychological processes, which are real human processes, are not combination of elementary processes. They're not like buildings built from these separate bricks. They are of a different nature. And that was the final decision, final point of the journey of Wundt. Wundt came to this point and said that we can study elementary processes by using research methods, experimental methods, but higher psychological processes like logical memory, abstract thinking, we cannot, because they are absolutely subjective. They have no direct relation to physiology. So they are not physiologically driven. They are something special. That's why he wrote his famous folk psychology book. So that was the situation. And the question remains, if we psychologists are seriously thinking about to make our science a science, we have to find some objective processes in subjective phenomena, which is logically impossible. And the way to do this is just to change the logic. Because when I say logically impossible, I might mean simple formal logic. But there are different types of logics. One of these logics is so-called dialectical logic. And dialectical logic is different from formal logic. Dialectical logic was created by another great philosopher from Germany, Georg Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel, who introduced a different logic of studying the processes, not the things, but the processes, the changes. He said it's a logic of studying the changes, processes, studying development. And Vygotsky's contribution to psychology was he tried to apply dialectical logic of Hegel to study in psychology because that was the only way to resolve the problem. He said, yes, subjective mental processes are subjective mental processes. Yes. And they all are different. Everybody is unique psychologically. My thinking is not as your thinking. Your imagination is not my imagination. So you have your subjectivity, I have my subjectivity. Okay. We have something in common. For example, you are interested in Vygotsky, I'm interested in pedagogy. You speak English, I speak English, so we can find something together, but we are different. So how we can then make any generalization? Impossible. But answer of Vygotsky was very clear. Yes, subjective high psychological functions are subjective, but they all develop according to the same laws. The process of development of higher psychological function is objective process. And the best way
so shifting from the thing to the process
to the process
was the key.
Yeah,
so, and moving from one logical paradigm to another was the way that he got there.
Yes, that's why it was so important for him to apply dialectical logic, because there is no other way to understand the variety of psychological processes. And they are so different that even if you find the patterns, it will not help. So his way was to understand. He said that the best way to understand the result, high psychological function, is to reconstruct theoretically and experimentally the whole process of its development, which brings this result. Results are subjective. Your memory, my memory, your thinking, my thinking are very subjective. But your thinking and my thinking developed according to the same law of development of higher psychological functions called thinking. That was the contribution of Vygotsky. That's why Vygotsky is so interesting, because he really discovered several laws of development of higher psychological functions, which are as objective as laws of physics or chemistry or biology.
So if the functions themselves are not objective, the laws of their development are.
Yes,
correct?
laws of development, and the process of their development is objective process. Okay, it's like, my favorite example is that if you look on the tree, you cannot find two absolutely identical trees. Yeah, my palms, I have six palms in my garden, they are different. So, but every palm grows according to the same law. So, and the process of how the palm grows is absolutely an objective process.
Just a quick side question.
Which does not
Yeah,
depend on us. It's the laws. We are not created. If they objectively, that's very important to understand the principles. That's why I'm speaking too much about that, because my concern is that many young or early career researchers, they are just coming to Vygotsky directly, grabbing from Vygotsky some ideas which look very interesting, but they are not familiar with the dialectical logic and dialectical principles. And that's why probably they use something which looks very interesting, but they are losing the deepness of these things. That's why, sorry, I said it many, many times. I see you are smiling, but I want to repeat again and again and again, because this is extremely important to understand, because if you want to understand, because we have to start from this.
Yeah, thank you. And each time I hear it, I pick up something new.
Oh yeah, I try not to repeat just that.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. And I have a quick question. So you talked about some palm trees in your garden and how they're different, and the amount of fruits or how they might develop.
Oh yeah.
The results might look different, but the process is objective. Now, how about some other trees? Do they share the same process of development as palm?
Yeah, it was just an example, illustration.
No, I know, but I'm just wondering, like, when does the so other trees of a different type would have the same tree development process as the palm tree?
Yeah, but there are some laws of growing, biological. They're not biological. They are botanic laws of growing. But of course, this is analogy. Don't take it too literally, too directly, because what is important also in the process of development is that in the process of development, the things are changing, but sometimes they are qualitatively changing. So dialectically, the process of development includes moments of qualitative changes, qualitative reorganization of the system. It's like, again, my second favorite example is like the bud, then the flower, and then the fruit. So it goes through the certain stages and qualitative reorganization, which is very important to understand development, because many people still understand development in very simplistic way. I have a lot of discussions with my friends about development, and for many people, if something changes, they immediately call it development. For them, development is the same as change. Just the child speaks in 2 sentences and say, oh, wow, it's a speech development.
Mm.
So development is not just same, it's not the same as change, and not every change is development. So development is not just something small becomes bigger. It's not. Development is a process of reorganization and differentiation. Because every tree was very small, and then differentiation, then the waves appeared, then the leaves appeared. So this is process of differentiation, which is very important to understand development dialectically. Okay. So
Go ahead.
And the second point is that qualitative changes, just qualitative changes, which are components of development. So and then when I say development, Anthony, I always mean dialectical process. When I say development, I don't mean just simple change or growth or something. Plus, minus. As Vygotsky said, development is not plus, minus. It's not just, it's not explained, it cannot be explained like this. Development has its own internal logic. Okay? It's self-movement, he says, self-movement. Okay? Because of contradictions and qualitative reorganization. I can show you something if you like.
Sure.
I just want to show you this, what Vygotsky said, what development is. In this quotation, he is saying that we will never understand child development without changing our view. And the change of view is that child development is a complex dialectical process. You see here, complex dialectical process characterized by complex periodicity, disproportion in the development of separate functions, and then metamorphosis or qualitative transformations of certain forms into others.
I would like you to answer some questions, but continue if you'd like. Can I ask a few questions now?
This is, I just finished. This is one of the characteristics of development, the complex dialectical process which are characterized by metamorphosis. And metamorphosis is the term he took directly from Hegel. But as if he is afraid we do not understand what it is, he says metamorphosis, which is qualitative transformation of certain forms into others. And then complex merging, the processes of evolution, complex crossing of. So you see how complex the process is. How many times he repeats the word complex here. You see, complex dialectical process, complex periodicity, okay? Complex crossing, complex process. See, complexity. Now your questions.
Very helpful. No, that's great. Not at all. So I'm going to give you 3 things to compare to help maybe clarify this point. So can we compare a bud, a flower, and a fruit? So that transformation. Can we compare water and ice and steam?
No.
And can we maybe compare the process of a butterfly developing?
Butterfly, yes. Butterfly, yes.
So when the bud goes to the flower, it still has its bud essence.
Yeah.
And when the flower goes to the fruit, it still has its bud and flower.
Philosophically, it's a negation of the negation. And you probably remember that law, that the next stage is a kind of negation of a sublation, which means that it becomes hidden within, not dies completely. You remember, you had an access to my chapter about dialectics. So, and ice and water and stem is very good example of qualitative transformations, but this is not a dialectical transformation, because dialectically there is no way back. Can you see the flower coming back to the bud? No.
Not until it creates a new bud. Yeah.
Yep. So physically. So water can come from stem to water, then to ice, then back to water. So, and it's more quantitative changes, because it's just a distance between the atoms, a physical distance between the atoms, connections. So it can be very easily explained by just quantitative characteristics. That's why in physics it is called the aggregate states of water, right? Yeah? Aggregate states means that it all depends on the how long atoms are from each other, or how close they are to each other. So this is not the example of development, because water does not develop. Water just changes, remains the same, but changes the aggregate state. That's why. That's why it's not.
So a change of state is not dialectically developmental, but some sort of qualitative reorganization is. Can you just try to explain qualitative reorganization in another sort of different type of way?
Yeah, but I don't know how to explain. Well, just I think take your butterfly example.
Okay.
Take my fruit example. So there are new quality of things. It doesn't mean that it's only looks differently. It means that it's organized differently. Because do you remember I also said that qualitative change, qualitative reorganization means differentiation. Do you remember I said differentiation, when you differentiate?
And what exactly do you mean by that?
Differentiation is that, again, coming back to my example, the small tree is a small tree. And how many waves? Maybe potentially 2 or 3 waves. When the tree grows, there are more waves coming. So the tree differentiates with waves and leaves and so on. These are, and if you follow Hegel's logic, they are new parts of the system. As if the system creates from itself, generates new parts, components. It becomes, every year become more and more leaves, for example. So, and mechanical systems never do like this. Mechanical system, for example, your car is your car, and you cannot expect from your car next year there will be 5 wheels and 6 cylinders in your car instead of 4, right? Never. So organic systems are developing through the process of differentiation. They are just creating their new parts from themselves, right? Okay. Take the family as an example. Family. First family, when you got married, I take ideal case, so you are only 2, and then your family generates something, and then in 5 years, see, you have 5 children. Wow. Family grows, and you see the difference. It was a qualitative change. Life of parents before the children and life of the parents after the children. Right? Their whole life is completely reorganized, and there are new parts, new components, which in Hegel's sense we can call new organs, because it's organic system. It consists from organs. So take our body, very complex differentiated system, but believe me or not, but everybody was at the beginning just a simple one living cell, which began to grow, differentiate, and then, so these all are examples of qualitative reorganizations and differentiations. That's why the word transformation might be not good, because transformation means transformation, change of form, or transition from one form to another, transform. But what is form? Form is just an external form.
That makes me think of water to ice.
Yes, this is an example of transformation, but this is not an example of qualitative reorganization, because water does not develop, which means that water does not create new parts, doesn't become bigger.
So this quotation on the screen is this like early in his process? Because he's talking about transformation of forms into other forms. Did he speak differently at a different time?
No. But he speaks about qualitative transformation.
Okay, all right.
not just quantitative transformation, qualitative transformation. He tries to explain in a way. So and this qualitative transformation is a reorganization, because first new organs appear and then a new quality appears, which cannot be reduced back. So well, you cannot come back with your family to the times when there were no children. Of course, due to the process of negation, when you are getting older, when your children leave you and begin to live separately, then again you are coming to the stage when you and your wife are together. But this is an example of negation of the negation. So it's you are again two of you, but on a much higher level of development. These are examples of qualitative change and qualitative. That's why I prefer to use the word reorganization rather than transformation, because transformation immediately generates in our mind something like changing the external form, exterior form. But yes, this is, but not every transformation is qualitative reorganization.
Just like not every change is developmental.
Yeah, absolutely. Not absolutely. So and just to make it easy to understand, I can give you one more example. I don't remember. Maybe I gave this example to you. Maybe not. So it's an example about the movie, famous movie called Transformers.
We haven't discussed this, no.
No, we haven't. So, yeah, there was some time ago, some years ago, there was a series of movies called Transformers. Very, very popular movies. Did you have a chance to look at watch?
Yeah, and I play. Those were all the toys that I played with.
Yeah. Okay, Okay. So, and why the title is Transformers? Because they are characters in this movie. Some of them, at least, are Transformers. But why they are called Transformers? Why this name? Because they can change their form. They are becoming something like humans, robots. But when it's needed, they are just change the form and becoming a cars, right? Yeah, and then they move the car, and then they can come. So, and they are very limited in their transformations. They are just becoming cars or robots. That's why they're called Transformers. They are not reorganizers. So, because look, they are the same number of pieces, the same number of parts. They do not generate from them something new. There is no differentiation. There is no qualitative change. They remain the same, but only change their form, in the form of the car, in the form of the robot. So this is a transformation, a very clear transformation. But this transformation is not qualitative transformation, which is reorganization.
And two more quick, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And that two more quick ones, that sends my mind to, I hope you saw the Terminator, or no, Schwarzenegger,
Yeah.
with the cop who was made of like some sort of like liquid molten metal, and so he could transform into some other shape and then return, but he could transform into an endless amount of shapes and return. So
yeah.
So
yeah,
the endless amount of transformational possibilities would still not
yeah,
qualify, right?
yeah. So
Because
qualitative. Mhm.
simply as long as it could return and revert back, it would not
No,
count. In the,
no. That's that's the dialectical understanding of development.
Mhm,
You see that not every change is a development, but development is not possible without change.
mhm.
You see, you hear the dialectics here, right? So, and the development is objective process. Of course, there are most fundamental, basic, most fundamental dialectical laws of development, which are laws of dialectics, as you know. There are three most fundamental laws of dialectics. Every system in the world, in the universe, living system, which grows, which is a living system, which develops according to the dialectical laws. They are universal laws of development of every organic system. We can take society, we can take tree, we can take our body, families, any kind of. So, but the problem is that these universal laws are very universal. They are like a global. So, and the problem is that we cannot apply them directly to study psychological development.
How about something like an artificial intelligence, like machine learning program that is sort of organically adding to itself as it goes?
No.
Why not? Because that doesn't revert back to its original form. It's constantly learning.
Yeah, but does it create itself a new organs,
I
a
think
new
so.
parts?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
does I'm not sure. I don't really have any expertise in this field, but I
Yeah.
think so.
So, according to my knowledge, as far as I know, the so-called artificial intelligence
Mhm.
is very interesting. I don't want to criticize, but let's ask one question, Anthony. Just one simple question, because I think this is the question which really important to ask. People are doing, they're trying to create artificial intelligence. The question is, what do you mean by artificial intelligence? If we ask them, what do you mean by artificial intelligence? They say, the intelligence, by artificial intelligence, we mean the intelligence which is equal to human intelligence, but produced by machines, right? So, by artificial intelligence, we mean the intelligence which looks like human intelligence, but is not produced by humans, but produced by machines. This is the answer. I mean, a general one. And then they don't know one thing, which Vygotsky said. They don't know one thing, that our intelligence, Anthony, your intelligence, my intelligence, everybody's intelligence, is artificial. Because all our intelligence, thinking, memory, will, imagination, all they call is created, and we took it from the social environment. And the whole social environment is absolutely artificially created.
What
Books,
does that last sentence mean?
Books, languages were created by human, but mankind. So,
I'm sorry. What do you mean by the word artificial? When you say artificially created?
artificial, which means not natural. Our intelligence is not natural. It's not natural like grass and trees and palms. Grass, trees, and palms are natural, are parts of nature. But our intelligence or intellect is completely created in artificially created conditions. We are using language which did not appear as natural as trees and grass and rain and forests. It was created by the generations of people. We are using cultural objects which do not exist in nature. They are created by people. You are using pens and pencils.
Yeah, but weren't people created to create pencils, like, so to speak?
Yeah, but pencils were created by people. Created, artificial. They are artificial objects. They are not natural objects. And we are not using natural objects. We are using artificially created cultural objects. So culture is a system of artifacts. Do you know this? Artifacts. But what's the meaning artifacts? It's artificial phenomenon. So what they are doing actually, they're trying to create natural intelligence. They think that they are trying to make it artificial intelligence, thinking that our intelligence is natural. But the reality is that our intelligence is artificial. And what they are doing is they're trying to reproduce our artificial intelligence in mechanical systems. And mechanical systems will never have an opportunity to obtain the level of artificial created intelligence as we humans are. It's absolutely hopeless task. They can reproduce quite quickly some imitations of thinking, but machines will never be able to think creatively. You cannot expect from artificial intelligence to think critically.
I don't agree.
Yeah, you might.
I don't know. I think machines are going to produce works of art, just for example, that just blow us away, that just blow us out of the water in terms of everything a work of art can do.
Yeah.
Which would have to be considered a creative endeavor, and I think a lot of creative endeavors can be like sort of reverse engineered.
Yeah. But what you are saying is, I agree with what I was saying, but what you are saying is not about what I said before. You are saying that there are more and more things are now about this artificial intelligence. They are occupying, so to say. And your Terminator is just a very good example of the future. And this is really a danger, yes. But what I am saying is that even they are very strong, they will never be able to be human intelligent, because human intelligence, for example, critical thinking, machines will never be able. They will be able to recognize faces, to just to trace us, so we all are under control. But creativity, for example, critical thinking, for example, or productive imagination, which is very important.
So is there something about the meat and skin that we have that makes the difference?
No, what makes a difference is that we live in a human world. This is what makes difference. And I cannot imagine even the best developed in artificial intelligent machine sitting and dreaming about the date with the beautiful lady tomorrow. Impossible. Yeah. But how important is imagination for us? We can imagine worlds. We can imagine different things. And imagination is like oxygen, like a fuel which generates our thinking, our activity. Yeah. So this is important. Also,
if I was 19 years old again, I would set my career path as some sort of Vygotskian artificial intelligence researcher. I would try to blend those two worlds together. And I'm sure some people out there are trying to do it.
Yeah, but it's okay. It's okay. I wish them good luck.
I think having a strong Vygotskian understanding as some sort of programmer working in that world, I think would be a great advantage. But
yes, but if you take Vygotsky seriously,
Mm.
I prefer to think about how can I help children
Mm.
to develop their artificial intelligence, because the only intelligence we all have is artificial. How to help children to develop their imagination, to develop their thinking, to develop their feelings, to develop their memory, to make them cultural. How to open the world of culture for the children. How to make the world of culture, how to help them to understand that this is the world you can draw all your high psychological functions, which makes you human. So, and that's why I prefer to think about the role of arts, for example, in human development. What makes me sad is that when the movies nowadays is just a place to go for entertainment with a popcorn, but cinema, in principle, if you take Fellini or Tarkovsky, for example, is a great art. And for Tarkovsky and for Fellini and for Godard, movies were just pieces of arts, like the world famous pieces of arts in La Louvre everywhere. So, and it was just reduced to entertainment.
Mm.
And for Vygotsky, theater was a kind of the social technical feelings, which creates a special aesthetic feelings, aesthetic taste, makes us human. But now people go to theater just to tick the box, visit the theater for entertainment. It's a show business now, you know. So this is the much bigger problem when the children, many people, generations of people are excluded from their sources of development. They are excluded from the ideal forms.
Mm.
They are excluded from the ideal forms. And these ideal forms are excluded and replaced by very primitive examples of what does it mean to have a success in life, career, money, big house, all this consumerism. So there's a kind of misleading ideal forms which create the ways to go without having developmental perspective. That's why many people they are unable to think. You see in America, you see in Australia, you see in many countries, especially now when we have a crisis with the coronavirus, you see people cannot even analyze the simplest situations.
Yeah.
because they were excluded from ideal forms. They were not given the highest level of thinking. They did not have an experience to read Hegel or to read, I don't know, Kant, just to develop their thinking. They say philosophy, philosophy is something, blah, 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 blah. But philosophy is a school of thinking.
Mm.
And philosophy is a culture, is a critical culture, as Marx said. You see, for me, these problems are much more scary comparing to what artificial intelligence will take control over us. Might be, might be not, but this is what really happens now. So, and Vygotsky here to think about this is very, very helpful. Probably Vygotsky is only one psychologist who introduced the ways of how we can cope with this, how we can manage this, how we can change this. That's why 100 years after his death, almost 100 years, still ideas are in agenda because they are so fresh, they are so new, they are so powerful that social environment, cultural environment is the source of development of all higher psychological functions. But if the source is poisoned, the result is there.
It's a problem.
So this is much more important than nature protection, global warming, change climate. Nobody speaks about changing of society. Nobody speaks about encapsulation of people. Nobody speaks about the disaggregation of social contacts.
Mm.
So where is the source? If there is no social environment, if I have no interaction with others, there is no source from which I can draw something. The source is empty. There is no river from which I can drink. If there is no river, I drink nothing, I have nothing.
Is there
Sorry, it's again very philosophical. Oh, it took an hour of time. Oh, come on.
I'm gonna hold my questions for another
No.
But no. I think the culture conversation is very interesting, but we'll come back to that.
And you see how important Vygotsky is, because his focus was on that. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm ready to speak about this for ages.
That might be our next chat.
Because I think this is very important. And instead of discussing this Greta Thunberg stuff, global warming,
Sure.
So much more important. Of course it's important. Of course there is a global warming. Of course there is a climate change. But social, the crisis of sociality.
Do you have a catchy phrase for this? Is there like a cultural crisis, a social crisis?
Cultural crisis.
I think you need a catchphrase.
The devaluation of culture.
That's a heated topic for sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
I mean that's certainly one way to get in trouble, is to have that conversation.
Yeah.
You know, because there's so many different ways to go with it.
Well, I will be happy, but of course it's only my humble opinion.
Yeah,
okay,
no, it's really interesting, because there are many different diagnoses for why that might be, and I think many people have their one sort of enemy to point to for, okay, here's what's happening to culture, and here's why, and I have my enemy and you have yours, and it might not be the same explanations at all, but okay, so we come back to our list of 5 principles and the set of questions we've been using to discuss each principle individually, and here we are now at 5, and as far as I understand, any process has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and if you forget the end, if you're trying to understand the process, but you leave off the end, you're missing something. So let's dive in.
Yeah. Okay. Coming back to the principles, we had separate discussions about each of them, and this is the last one. And again, I want to repeat. I want to say again and again and again. I see in some publications they call it Veresov's principles, but they are not Veresov's principles. They are Vygotsky's principles. Of course, what I did, I just formulated this as a list of principles. Vygotsky did not formulate this list of principles. So, but he used these principles of organizing the experimental study. So he did it implicitly. What I did, I just took and create a kind of list. So, but they are Vygotsky's principles. So, and about principle 5, this principle is principle of sustainable qualitative changes as an outcome of the experimental work. You see here something which is very familiar to you, Anthony? Qualitative changes or qualitative reorganization, right? Yeah. And sustainable qualitative reorganization. What does it mean? It means that these are 5 principles of experimental study, right? So we do our experiment following these principles. We select some principles. We are not following all of them. We select some principles depending on our research question. It is not a requirement that we have to follow all these principles. Sometimes we're just focusing on one. I don't want to discuss the difference between psychology, research, and education research. We just will focus on that. And these are principles of experiment, but I want to just to refresh our mind. Vygotsky's experiment is not the experiment of the data collection from observation. We are collecting data, we are making clusters, we are making, how to say, they use patterns. No, Vygotsky's experiment is very different. Vygotsky's experiment is experimental genetic method. What does it mean, genetic? It means developmental. In experiment, because we have to study the process of development, we have to create a certain type of experiment which makes us able to study the process of development. The process of development, not just the final point, the whole process of development. This is important. So it's not a object under study, it's a kind of, not subject under study, it's a process under study, so to say. Okay? So, and Vygotsky says that this method is experimental genetic methods because it artificially creates a process of psychological development. It creates the special settings which generates the process of psychological development. Why? And Vygotsky says, due to this, he says, we are able experimentally to elicit a certain development, to make it visible, to make it observable. And then we collect the data. We don't need to find patterns anymore. We just reproducing the whole process, and we are capturing the most important moments of this process for analysis. So that's a kind of difference. And this is very important. And requirement is very strong. If you take Vygotsky as your theoretical framework, you have to, you should, you must take, as a researcher, you should take experimental genetic method as your research methodology. You cannot use Vygotsky's theoretical framework and do classical traditional experimentation like observing and collecting data and then finding patterns, repetitions. No, they do not fit.
But that's very common.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's why I'm saying.
But that's also very common in research studies that have been productive and useful.
But
no?
But if you are only using theoretical tools, but you are not using experimental, so your experiment is not focused on studying the process of development, which means that you don't need this theory, because this theory is about to study the process of development. If you are not studying the process of development, if your research question is not about that, why then you take Vygotsky? What's the reason? It's like, you know, one of my examples is from Mark Twain, the great king's steel used for cracking nuts, but it's not for that. Okay, so
it's like a form of cultural appropriation, so to speak.
If you like, so.
It's not a term I usually use in a serious way, but it's like taking something and reappropriating it where it doesn't necessarily belong.
Yeah, and what I'm saying actually, Anthony, is that Vygotsky said clearly that if the problem is to study objective process of development using objective laws of development, how the laws demonstrate themselves, how the laws manifest themselves. So you have to apply the special method to study this, which is experimental genetic method. If you are not applying the method, why then you are using cultural historical theory as your theoretical framework? Because that theoretical framework was built to studying the process of development. But if you are not studying the process of development, you don't need that. But you know, many people, and even the Vygotskians, they don't care about that. They just do something interesting, they combine some pieces of data, make a kind of very popular now to say patterns. And then they try to explain these patterns using Vygotsky's concepts. And they are very successful. And they use Vygotsky's concept. That's all okay. Journals are happy to accept these articles, very good level of research, but in fact, it contradicts the idea of Vygotsky because it was his idea.
And our extended conversation has been sort of a modeling of the ideal form. Not ideal meaning best, but just here's what it could be, maybe what it should be. So what exactly does I think we've talked probably enough about what Principle 5 means. But
but I need to clarify. Coming back to Principle 5, why Principle 5 is so important? It's important because of the nature of this experiment. That's why I just said about what this experiment is, not just to refresh our memory, but to focus on that. So if we, in specially created conditions in a laboratory, we create some conditions for developmental opportunities, if we specially artificially elicit certain development, like not boosting, but just generating the development, we might have some results, some fruits at the end. And we might be happy about it. Say, look, we did the experiment, we have developed child's memory, and now it was like that, now it's like this. You see the qualitative change happened. The child is now thinking differently, or now the child's memory is working differently. That's Vygotsky's experiment, blah, blah, blah. And applauses, glories, grants, everything. But are you sure that what you did is a really qualitative change? Qualitative change is something which remains forever. Or not forever, but at least till the moment of the next qualitative change.
It doesn't go back to being ice.
It doesn't go back. So that's why my principle, this is important. If you come back to this child in a month and repeat the same test, you will see that what you have developed, and then in a week, in a month, completely disappears from child's mind. What does it mean? It means that, of course, you have created ideal conditions, and of course you have developed something. But this development is not a development because what you developed disappeared from child's mind in a very short time. But nobody cares about that. Look at psychological journals. They just show you the pre-test, post-test, and that's it. So just to avoid this situation, a risk that what you are developing is not the real qualitative change. Maybe the child might be too small to that. Maybe you are trying just to develop the fruit just directly from the bud, forgetting that it should be a flower in between. You can create something which looks like a fruit, but what you are doing actually, you are destroying the bud instead of making a fruit.
Say that in a different way, please.
Huh?
Say that in a different way when you say destroying the bud.
Well, I mean, if you are trying to use your force to convert the bud into the fruit in specially created conditions, so you can have something as a result which might look like a fruit, but it's not a fruit because it's impossible to do from bud the fruit, because there is a stage in between which is a flower. So actually you are changing the bud in such a way that you will never make a fruit of that because it's impossible, but you might destroy the bud.
Yeah, one of the most helpful things I learned about concept development is the pseudo concept, which is basically it's the appearance, right? It's the illusion of some sort of
Yes.
concept.
Yes.
And as a classroom teacher, as a parent, etc., as an individual looking in the mirror, it's a good thing to have in mind. This idea of the pseudo concept.
I really, really love your comment, because this is an example how the logic of development, the dialectical logic of development, is totally ignored by saying that everything is in the social conditions. Just create the conditions, because Vygotsky says children drinks everything from social environment, create a social environment, and it will be all fine. Okay, good, good, good. So I know a lot of research like that. And one of the examples is that there are some researchers who are trying to implement the concept formation. They are trying to create academic scientific concepts in children of the early childhood, in children of 5-6 years old. Of course, they create special conditions, they create plays, the children can learn scientific concepts, everything goes well, and when you ask the child the concept, they give you a correct answer, and it's all okay, all okay. Publications, keynote speeches, boom, perfect, perfect, perfect. But let's come back to our principle, qualitative change. If you ask the child in a couple of weeks the same question, no. Why? Why? Because concept formation is a process, and the fruits in the process are available for the child only in primary. Children before primary school, children at age of 5, 6, they cannot think scientifically. They cannot think. Their thinking is everyday concepts. Everyday concepts. And these are the buds. These are the buds. But the buds should go through the flower stage, becoming and become a fruit. So the tricky, and Vygotsky speaks about that directly, saying that what's the difference between everyday concepts and scientific concepts? You might say, "Hi, Nikolai, we know the difference. Everyday concepts are just everyday concepts. They are just taken by children or from their experience, and scientific concepts are from the science, from the scientific. They are abstractions." That's all are correct, absolutely. But you know, Anthony, that scientific concepts have one important characteristic. They are not isolated concepts. They only exist as a system of concepts. We cannot study scientific concepts just one by one. Children should understand the system of 3 or 4 concepts at the same time, which is, of course, impossible for the children at the age of 5. If you tell them directly, they can memorize, because the most developed functions in children at the age of 5 is memory. For children at this age, to think is to remember or to recall. So you can develop their memory. They will memorize the concepts you are creating. They can reproduce these concepts, but they are not able to think with these concepts because they have no abstract thinking.
Principle 5, if I had a nickname for it in my head, it might be the humility principle.
You see, can I just focus on that? So
sure.
you see the idea that everything depends on the social environment completely doesn't fit. So there is an internal logic, there is a self-development, and this is very important. And what happens is that instead of doing things in proper time, people are trying to move the development of concept to the early stages. They think that they might help children, but they are not actually helping children, because they are not working with their everyday concepts. But Vygotsky said that everyday concepts is important prerequisite for scientific concepts, and it should be an interaction of ideal and real. But if you are only coming and through play introducing scientific concepts without asking children what concepts they have, what are their everyday concepts, if there is no interaction of the ideal and present form, they can memorize just to be good to you, because they want to know the good answer, but it doesn't mean that they have scientific thinking. It doesn't mean that they have abstract thinking. But if they do not have abstract thinking, for what reason they should have scientific concepts? They might have tools, but not able to use these tools. The only reason of such kind of research is just to get money from the government, I think. That's it. So, the next point, which is important, is about the principle of sustainable qualitative changes. If, for example, it happens that after my experiment, I come in, well, usually I do repetition in week, then in 2 weeks, and then in a month. Okay, so, but imagine something happens that you're coming back and test the child again in a month, and you see that what you have developed disappeared completely from child's mind. And which means that there is no sustainable qualitative results, which means that your experiment was not successful, which means many, many things. But why this principle goes the last? It helps me to find where is my fault. If after this something happened, I look at other principles and ask questions. Maybe my experiment was not successful because I did not find the proper buds of development. Maybe it was my mistake. Maybe the child had no buds, had no, you remember that, had no higher psychological function, which is just on the bud stage. Maybe my mistake was there, and I have to think about it, and I have maybe to redesign my experiment. I have to rethink about it if the problem is there. Or it might be that the contradiction, the collision, the social situation of development I created was not as dramatic. Maybe it was pseudo-dramatic. Sometimes children are just playing dramatic play, but they are led by a teacher. They are imitating dramatic plays. They are not really having their spirituality. Maybe the mistake is there. Or maybe the ideal forms I selected and I tried to use was not good ones. Or maybe the interaction of the ideal and present was not properly organized. Maybe, yes. And finally, maybe the tools, developmental tools I suggested and implemented were not appropriate, were not good enough for this. So it gives me a kind of opportunity to revise all my experimental settings and to play with them, because I don't know the answer. So I'm repeating my experiment. I'm changing another buds. I'm trying to use different kind of dramas, or I bring new ideal forms, or I use different tools. So I'm playing with my experiment. I'm repeating experiment with different children. One experimental series, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20. So until I have a qualitative reorganization.
we're not talking about teaching. We're talking about psychological experiments. But
Yeah, we are
but but
we are
but
talking about. Mhm.
but you may realize you're also indirectly talking about the art of teaching, and you know, sometimes the outcome is some sort of end of the unit test or assessment, and assessments are not they're not only painful to grade because they take a lot of time, but they're a real hard look in the mirror, and sometimes the grading process is painful because, you know, what it is evidence of a breakdown in one of these
Mhm.
principles, so
Mhm.
to speak. You know?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
part of
yeah,
the art of teaching, at least being reflective, is trying to
yeah,
diagnose.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You are
So
right because
it's not a perfect analogy, but you know, there's a lot you're saying that's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
resonating.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree, and because you are a
Yeah.
teacher and you know better, and I agree that teachers are forced to analyze to grade the results without having deep analysis of why the result like this, what was missed, what was not done properly to get to this result, because there might be millions of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And the same, yeah, I agree completely.
But
So
I like these five principles as a sort of diagnostic or reflective tool from a teacher's point of view, because, you know, they're all right there. This is basically one form or one methodology for classroom instruction,
yeah,
and I call principle five in my head. I call it the humility principle, because we'd like to have the illusion. We'd like to have the illusion that we have some sort of evidence in front of us, but it might just be pseudo evidence,
yeah, yeah.
and if we had the time and the inclination, we could sort of
Yeah,
painfully
it's yeah, yeah.
pull apart the whole
It's
process.
very interesting, and you know, and of course, you remember we had a conversation about the Davidov's programs, huh? Davidov's theory of developmental learning, teaching, обучение, and so they have also a system of tests. They are testing children, of course, their intellectual development, but their tests are different. They are testing how many methods the children can use to solve different problems. They are not testing problem solving. They are giving the child a series of tasks. Every task requires one special method the child should recognize which task can be solved by which method, and then they apply. So this is what they are testing. They are testing the child's capacities. The child is becoming capable to solve certain problem of mathematical tasks because the child is equipped, is armed with the methods, and his task is just to select the method which fits to this task, because this task is of that type. So they are looking on the task, they identify what type of the task it is. Then they take the method which fits to this type of the task, they apply. And they don't care about what is the answer. What they care about is the child correctly identifies the type of the task? Is the child correctly uses the method? But how the child applies the method, it doesn't matter. It might be technical errors, but what is important is that the child is becoming capable in mathematics, because mathematical capacity is that when the child looks at the task, he immediately understands what type of the task it is and what instruments he can use to solve this task. If he does it correctly, then it's only a technical
Right.
side.
I see.
So this is what Davidov developed, and I think this fits nicely with one kind of from Vygotsky, and on the other hand with your pedagogical examples. So we are testing the development of child capacities.
So it sounds like if you're going to use Principle 5 in your research design, you have to have some sort of longitudinal approach.
Yeah, it's a sort of longitudinal. But
I might be using
not,
that term wrong, but you have to have some distance. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to repeat. Well, what I say, you have to repeat at least twice.
Okay.
Your post-test, you have to repeat at least twice to make sure that as a result you got what you wanted. But what we want is a qualitative change. If it doesn't happen, something went wrong. So you have to,
sometimes the brainwashing wears off.
yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm using that term in a neutral sense.
No, it's okay. Yeah. We are very politically correct. No problem with that.
So, can you share some examples of studies that have used this method and particularly have used Principle 5?
Well, as I said, it was Vygotsky's principle, but as I said, I just put this list and introduced that list sometimes some years ago, and honestly, it was not as well accepted by the community because it's like in strong contradiction with the tradition. Because traditionally, so-called Vygotskian scholars, traditionally they don't care about qualitative change. They only speak about that, but they cannot give an experimental proof that this is a qualitative change. They don't care. That's why probably they don't like. And that's why I was, for many years, just expecting from next generation of young early career researchers to use these principles. And by now, there is an example of one study in Russia done by that, one study in Sweden, in Finland, in Brazil, and in Serbia, and in Greece. So young researchers are becoming familiar with these principles, and they like these principles because it gives us a clear picture. They can learn how to design Vygotsky's experiment without learning this directly from Leontief or Vygotsky. So, and there are some things done, but not so much, unfortunately. And honestly, I did my job, Anthony. So I just created this list. I introduced, and of course, all my PhD students who are doing cultural historical, they are using these principles, not because I'm their supervisor, because I explained to them that if you take cultural historical theory, it's very easy. You don't need to think about the methodology. This is a methodology. You have no choice. Just do like that. So, but I don't want to give you examples of research of my PhD students. I think it's not modest. But
I'm sure they wouldn't mind. I'm sure they wouldn't mind.
Okay, well then, I have mentioned my student Vala Mandili, who did research about English speech development in primary schools in
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. So that was an example of research done on the principle of ideal and real forms. So she just specially studied the ideal forms. And it's, it's principle 3 in the list. So, but she did not create these ideal forms. She just made a kind of analysis of existing ideal forms and how teachers use this. But however, so one of the principles was incorporated and related to the development of speech, which is not learning language, but speech development. You see, that was a kind of. So my second example is my PhD student, Samran Daneshvar, who is now doing very interesting research. He didn't finish yet, but very interesting research about private speech. You know, this phenomenon of private speech, but he is looking on very interesting special private speech. He is looking at development or how private speech develops in adults having 2 languages already, Kurdish and Persian, and they are studying English. And how their private speech develops, having already 2 private speeches, Persian or 1 Persian Kurdish private speech, and how through learning English they develop their English private speech.
And how
do they develop or not? And she creates an experimental situation. She creates a drama. She creates a kind of tasks, just logical tasks in English, and it's a battery of tasks, just simple questions, and the answer should be given in English, and the tasks are given in English. For example, you have two brothers, your brothers have two brothers, how many altogether brothers there are in the family? But the point is that they are with the increasing level of difficulty. And at a certain stage, they begin to speak to themselves in order to find the answer. And what is the most interesting is, even though the task is in English, even though the answer should be in English, in their speech, when they speak, they are using English, Kurdish, and Persian. What does it mean? It means that for the child who is only having his native language, first it's a communicative speech, then a social speech, then private speech, then internal speech, then thinking. This is the logic Vygotsky's. But adults, they already have private speech. So they are having new private speech, but then old private speech activates. You see, the process of development of English private speech is not as process as development of native private speech. It's a different process, but still is the process from communication to yourself, then communication in mind, and then thinking. You see, my student, he is looking on the development. He says that what is the developmental trajectory of private speech of second language learners? And their language proficiency is very high. We selected, specially selected subjects with a very high English language proficiency. And the tasks were quite difficult. And as small children in native language, we have the same story of adults with the foreign language, which repeats all the things which Vygotsky discovered with small children learning their native language. We are doing the same. So the situation is the same, but the process, the objective process of development from communicative speech, differentiation to social speech and private speech, and then to inner speech, and then. So the logic, dialectics, the objectivity of the process remains. But of course, because of the different situation, it goes differently. It goes differently, but it goes the same way. The stages are the same. Buds, flowers, fruits.
So talk about the fruits in that particular experiment, in that particular study. Talk about the Neoformations principle.
Neoformation, yeah.
How is that researcher using that principle?
No. His research was about, he was studying the private speech, how the private speech becomes. So as a kind of, because we know that the private speech will be thinking later, but he was interested in this very particular, very interesting situation when the private speech just appears and enriches the existing private speeches and their private speech. So this is a very, very interesting, complex private speech which contains some elements of Kurdish, some elements of Persian, and some elements of English. Why it is important? It is important because for many researchers, for them, speech and private speech is something which mediates their activity. If you look on the fantastic research on the private speech of second language learning, L2, they all think about private speech as a tool. But my student and myself, we say, no, private speech is not a tool. Private speech is a high psychological function, which does not mediate as tools mediate, which does not mediate, but which is mediated. Which is mediated by the tools, and these tools are languages. Languages. Because when we are communicating, we speak to each other. You speak to me, I speak to you. This is what is communicative speech. It doesn't mean that our speech mediates. No, we are speaking to each other. This is a communication. We are building our speech. We are speaking together. But what mediates? Language, English. We are using English language as a system of cultural tools, signs, to mediate our conversation.
Okay, so principle 5 is, in some way, it forces you to sort of check yourself or not get too ahead of yourself or too excited, thinking something has been achieved when it might not. Is there any research studies that you can reference where this principle has been explicitly used, either in the design or in the execution?
Yeah, well, your question is again about the difference between pedagogical research and psychological research.
Okay.
All my colleagues are educators. They are doing education research, which means that we do not have a special created conditions in the laboratory. So we are not creating the conditions for development as Vygotsky did. That's why we cannot guarantee that the changes which happens in childs are qualitative. So it's not about that. We are very limited because they are doing only observations. So, and that's why there are many, very, very seldom answers. But when I do my experiments, when I try to do it myself, it's a kind of, the principle says, when you finish your data collection, when you did your post-experimental test, don't celebrate, it's not a finish. Come again in a week and repeat. And that will be finished, or you have to start from the very beginning, depending on the result. Because if there is no qualitative change, there is no development. If there is no development, it means that in your experiment you develop nothing. If you develop nothing in your experiment, so you have to think about how to change all the settings using all principles. This is very simple. I think it's very simple. But one of my students, she's got an academic position in Deakin University in Australia, Victoria Minson. She did a little bit of something like developmental conditions. It was in the natural settings. She was studying children, but because of teachers were involved, together with teachers, they have created a kind of experimental situation to develop, to create the conditions. I don't want to tell you the whole story, but in fact, they have developed there was one girl who had a problem in telling stories, show and tell, you know.
Yeah, we've discussed this one.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
So and Victoria, so when that girl Eve were able to tell the whole story about the little pigs, then Victoria, because she likes the principle, she came back in 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks or a month, and she didn't test the child again. She was just talking with the teacher. She said that does Eve has any problems with show and tell? She says no. She tells every story. She knows because she has now ability to keep all the logic of the story. Never mind how many events. Never mind who is so. So, and it was not just a direct confirmation of the principle, but at least teacher said no more problems with show and tell. So yeah, this might be an example.
It makes sense. So you have to check. You have to check back at some point.
Yeah, and neoformation is important because I also have something here to.
Just one sec.
I think I have something. Again, I can read this quotation from Vygotsky. he says that high psychological functions are not built up as a second floor over elementary processes, but they are new psychological systems that include a complex merging of elementary functions, which are included now in a new system, and they begin to act according to the new laws. Neoformations are the reorganized system of functions. This is what neoformation is. Neoformation is the new type of organization of child's system of high psychological functions and even child's activities in child's life. So this is what neoformation is. Neoformation is not just something new, like the child had no logical memory, and then we have developed logical memory, and the child has a logical memory. No, no, no. When we develop logical memory, the child internalizes. It changes completely all other processes.
Mm.
All other processes are coming in the new system. They begin to work according to the laws of this new system. They do not disappear, but they are. So this is a total qualitative reorganization, not just a transformation. It's a qualitative reorganization. This is what's important. This is what neoformation is. Neoformation is not just something else, something plus something new. No. This something new should be new in a dialectical sense, which means this something new should be a new system of all other functions.
So can you explain, and I think you maybe already just did, can you explain why neoformation is a better term than, say, neofunction?
But neofunction speaks about something, about new function, new function. But child always has a system of functions. Okay? And when a new function comes internalized, it reorganizes the whole system. It reforms, it makes a reform. Of course, reform is not a good word, but it's something new formed. But behind that form is a complete reorganization. That's why neoformation is much better term. I might be very critical to this term, but it's Vygotsky's term. New function is just several functions plus one more or two more. It doesn't work like this. It's always.
What is happening when we have the appearance of a neoformation but no confirmation that it's actually happened? Like what is that?
If it doesn't happen, it means that it didn't happen.
But what can we call that appearance of a neoformation?
No, well,
like what I'm saying is, you said many people celebrate at the end of a study without going back to test it a second time, for example.
Yeah, so, because
that's an illusion or an assumption of a neoformation.
Yeah, it's not an illusion. It's it's a tradition of doing psychological experiments. There is a prescribed procedures of doing traditional classical psychological experiments. And for example, traditional classical intervention experiments, like you have a group of children, you are making a pre-test, then you are doing intervention, and there are some changes, and then you are doing post-test, and then you are comparing pre-test and post-test to see that there is a qualitative correlation, called qualitative change, because of the significant differences or non-significant, any significant differences they call qualitative. For them, qualitative is this. But for dialectical thinkers, qualitative is not this. Qualitative is the reorganization. And to make sure that this is a reorganization, you should not limit yourself on a pre-test and post-test. You have to have a post-test. But for them, qualitative is significant, and that's it. It's okay, it's enough. And they were trained about that. They were learned. They are trained psychologists, experimental psychologists. So, but they were not trained in doing cultural, historical, genetic experiment.
So there's less attention to longevity and less attention to transfer.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a tradition. It's a traditional method of doing psychological experiments. Even they are implementing the elements of Vygotsky. Even they are trying to say that okay, this is ideal forms. Sometimes they are doing some things, but they forget about this fifth principle, which is important. You see how important it is.
Can the fifth principle, when you do like a say like a post test 1 week or 1 month later, does that have, can that be a sort of transfer style test where it's not really the same type of thing, but it's
no,
different activity that would utilize?
Of course. We are not repeating the same.
Yeah,
it's stupid to repeat the same. So of course the same type, but different. Yeah. So, and you see the importance of this principle is very high, and it prevents us from being too optimistic that we can do everything following Vygotsky. I have debates, discussions, arguments with my colleagues who are saying, Nikolai, what about you say that children are too young, children are not ready. Age is socially constructed. You don't understand Vygotsky. I said, okay, maybe I don't understand. Age is socially constructed, but however, each age has a very clear characteristics.
Yeah, so that sounds like something.
So
it sounds like something people without children would say, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh well, they are researchers with children, but they are doing the research. But it's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind. I just don't cooperate with these people, and then they are not asking me what is my opinion. They know Vygotsky better than me. It's okay, no problem. I have no problem with that. If somebody knows Vygotsky better than me, shows it. Look, it happens. Vygotsky is right. But when I come to the student, I give them the same task in a week. What they say, Vygotsky was wrong because it didn't work. I say no. Vygotsky was right, and that's why it didn't work. It's not Vygotsky who was wrong. You were wrong. But they don't allow me even to come and show. It's easy. I'm ready to come to their lab. We have a lab like that, very close, and show them. But of course, I'm not allowed to go.
Well, if you're not allowed to go, then that means they're not watching this video. But let's pretend they were. And you wanted to form some sort of bridge,
but
to maybe move past this sticking point. What might you say?
But Anthony,
I'm always looking to build bridges.
It's okay. I don't care. They can develop scientific thinking, scientific concepts in children at the age of 5. No problem with that. So why should we use our energy for that? People are doing things they trust. People are doing things they have a glory about. They have money. They have grants. They have their respect. They have recognition. It's okay. No problem about that. Why not ask to do better things we understand? Why should we spend time, energy, just to show that what they're doing is not Vygotsky? Why should I? No, really, Anthony. I have published these 5 principles almost 10 years ago. It's so easy just to open my papers, look at these 5 principles, and ask, hey, can we check, if you are Vygotskians, can we check this 5th principle? They are not secret principles, they are open. Everybody can do this, if they wish. But they don't. If they don't wish, what should I do? You can bring horse to the water, but you cannot force the horse to drink. I did my job, I did what I did. And I think, and you see now that it's everything I did is not from my head. It's all Vygotsky's things. And yeah, so I just leave it without comment. I wish everybody great success in the science, and I'm ready to support everyone. But in my research, I will do things I trust. I want to show you something.
I'm kind of pro diversity.
Yeah, I know.
I think diversity is good.
Yeah, it's okay. No problem. No problem. I want to show you something. Maybe I just wanted to, I had a discussion with my colleagues, biologists. They're doing biology. They're doing science for young children. And they said, oh, Nikolai, children can understand scientific concepts in biology very easily. Nikolai, your Vygotsky was not right. Your Vygotsky was, no. And they say, look, Vygotsky was working with children 100 years ago. Now children are different. Children are different now. Children can now accept and can develop scientific concepts because the childhood is different, because of the digital world, because of this and this and this. And children can think abstractly, no. And do you know what I did? I just said, okay, let's take biology as an example. Look here. You know this, of course. Mm-hmm. As a teacher, you know this. Can you see?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. This is a Linnaeus system before Darwin. Look, we are not even touching Darwin. Darwin is much more complex, as you know. Mm-hmm. So, how can the child understand just this concept, the concept of class of animals, or just family? Doesn't make sense. The child has to understand the whole. Right? Can you imagine the child at the age of 5 who can easily, quickly distinguish between this or too high, too high task? But what they can do, they can train the child to remember all these things and to answer correct questions from the memory. It might look that the children can think abstractly, but the only thing is that children can remember different things and reproduce this and recall this when they are asked. However, the whole system of concepts is this. Even look, please note, I'm not touching even theory of evolution. Or from physics, how the child can understand the concept of gravity.
Well, even this list on the screen right here, in order to talk about one of these words deeply, like to really drill down, you have to talk about the other words, even if it's just in terms of contrast.
Yeah, because you cannot understand the order of family, because family is a part of the class, which is a part of the kingdom. So this is what is that. So system of concepts, only system of concepts. They do not exist separately. And how children can understand gravity? They say, oh yeah, Nikolai, it's easy. They can understand gravity. We just make an experiment with children. Just something falls on the floor, and they say, no, this is the gravity. The Earth is a magnet, and it's like a magnet. So it's very easy for children to understand the concept of gravity. I said, no, it's not a concept of gravity, because the concept of gravity is related with other concepts. For example, the concept of mass and the concept of speed, right? So, but I'm speaking about Newtonian gravity. I'm not speaking about Einsteinian gravity, which is related to the geometry and the speed of light, all these things. So what they're actually doing, they are introducing some concepts, scientific concepts to children, they are familiarizing children with some concepts, but it's not a concept development. It's not a concept formation. It's not a conceptual thinking, not at all, because of the level of development of the child. It should be buds when you want flowers to grow. When there are no buds, you will never get a flower.
And you don't want to jump. You don't want to jump. You don't want to jump from buds to fruit.
Yeah, but the buds appear. Every bud appears at certain period of child's life.
And
not earlier, not later.
And we could read your book to find the answer to that.
Sorry?
And we could read your new book to find the answer to that question, right?
Oh, maybe.
Or we could read Vygotsky, yeah.
Oh, we can write something together. When I finish my book, probably we'll write together a new book about how Vygotsky in the classroom.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Okay. So, anything else for today?
I have nothing left in my head that I could think of. So, but I'm sure I will. And there were some moments during today's chat that definitely could be exploded into a larger conversation. So who knows? Maybe we'll do it again.
Anytime when you are ready, when you feel you need the continuation, my pleasure always. I'm always happy. I never said no to you.
No.
I always say yes, of course. So the only problem is to find time, but we can find time.
Yeah, and I hope this is also valuable for you. And
absolutely. Absolutely. Your questions are fantastic, and you think really as a good teacher. Sometimes I forget. I was a teacher also, but I was not a bad teacher. But I never had such questions like you have. So probably it means that I was not a good teacher. Not as good as you.
Yeah, well, I'm a mess, so that's another story. But
okay.
I guess we'll talk soon. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice day.
Yeah, it was great.
Nice
Thanks.
day. Okay. Bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye.